photographers, if you have a shoot later today and you need to configure the Fuji X-H1 for video, let me get you up to speed quickly. And then, if you have time, stick around for some hacks and advanced suggestions. What I do above the basics. Now, I'll also provide a preview of the Fuji MKX Cinema lens, but let's start with the XF16-55. First, if you haven't done so already, install the latest firmware. It only takes a few minutes, and this video was recorded with firmware 1.11, and I'm starting with the camera in its default settings. The X-H1 has video recording speeds up to 200 megabits. That's 25 megabytes per second. You'll need a fast SD card. U3 or V30 will work, but I recommend a UHS-2 type card, which is supported in both slots. Always best to format the card or cards before you start shooting. Of course, back up the files on the card before you format. Use the dial to set the shutter speed to 60 and set the focus mode switch to C. Turn the drive collar to the video mode and the meter collar to multi. But note that it doesn't really matter because the only setting available for video is multi, so this is just a reminder of the mode that you'll be in. Now, if your lens has optical stabilization, OIS, turn it on, unless you're using a tripod. And if the lens has auto aperture, turn it off, so it's not on the A position. If it has marked aperture settings, turn it to f4. Now, we may adjust that later. On the movie menu, for most projects, I recommend shooting in 4K 16:9 with a frame rate of 30 frames. 2997 is 30 frames with an accommodation for timecode. Now, I recommend these settings because 4K is high quality and most display devices, TV sets, etc., have an aspect ratio of 16:9, and 30 frames is the standard for a TV in many countries, but if your standard is 25, you may prefer to use that. I always record at the highest bit rate. In this case, it's 200 megabits. Before recording, the display shows remaining time on the card or cards. A blank 64 gigabyte card will hold about 35 minutes. Once recording starts, there's a countdown top center. When it stops at the end of 15 minutes, you can start again immediately, but there will be a short gap. On the Setup menu, Save Data Setup selects which card will be used for video. And this can be useful if you'd like to keep your stills and video recording separate, but regardless of the card selected, the recordings are sequential. So once the selected card fills up, the X-H1 switches seamlessly to the other. Then, on the movie menu screen 3, check the 4K output setting. The X-H1 can record internally, but also supports external recordings using the HDMI port. Only one of the two can be selected to record 4K, and there's an option to record only externally. Make sure this is set at SD4K. The movie menu's settings are independent of, and sometimes different from, the still settings, and back on screen 2, set movie AF mode to area. This allows you to set the focus area. In multi, focus is fully automatic, and if you are shooting people, on screen 3, turn face detection on. Eye isn't available in movie mode. If your aperture dial isn't marked, set it now. Turn the ring until the screen displays f4, and even though we set the shutter speed dial to 60, the back dial makes micro shutter speed adjustments. Check that it's 60 or adjust until it is. Last exposure step is ISO. Use auto if you anticipate large changes in lighting. Otherwise, I recommend manual. And note that there are no auto ISO settings in movie mode. Use Setup Screen Setup to change the display custom settings. I find it useful to have the electronic level on, as well as the histogram. I use f4 as a default aperture, but you may wish to open it if the scene is dark, or close it to f11 or f16 if it's bright, or if you feel that a defocused background is distracting or undesirable for this shot. If you've decided to use manual ISO, turn the dial until the histogram is centered and then back off 1 or 2 clicks. That should give you a meter reading, screen left, about 0. But because the meter is set to multi, let your eye play a role. And feel free to exercise your creativity. The image on screen should look good to you. Don't be a slave to the meter. At this point, you may run into a problem. If the scene is too dark, after you've opened the aperture all the way, setting the shutter to 1/30th, as long as there's not a lot of movement, will help. And if it's too bright and you've closed the aperture all the way, you'll need an ND filter to get the exposure under control. Press the right side button on the control area to set the white balance. Now, it doesn't really matter which white balance you choose as long as it looks good to you. Just don't use auto, as it will make editing difficult. Press the left control button to select a film simulation. My default is classic chrome, but this is taste and judgment. If you want black and white, select it here. The default audio settings should be fine, but keep your eye on the meter on the left side of the screen, and if it starts to flash into the yellow or worse into the red, go to screen 4 of the menu and on audio change the internal mic settings from automatic to manual, and then make the adjustments that you need, referring to the meters on the side of the screen. Now remember that too low a recording is better than too high a recording. You can easily increase a low recording to get to the level you want, but eliminating the distortion from a high recording is pretty much impossible. While shooting, the focus point can be moved using touch or the joystick, but it can't be sized in movie mode. The viewfinder's eye sensor works in video mode, so the X-H1 can switch from viewfinder to LCD when you're recording. And if you tilt the screen up and shoot close to your chest, it disables the sensor, so it doesn't switch the viewfinder. That's nice. All right, press the shutter button to record, press it again to stop, and now you're ready to shoot. Now, if you have a few more minutes, let me start the advanced section by recommending the optional Fuji battery grip, as it's really a valuable addition for video. The bottom right shows the status of the internal battery and both batteries in the grip. Now the grip increases the 4K time limit to 30 minutes per clip, and it includes a headphone jack to allow monitoring while you record. And of course, it extends the battery life. So for this section, I'll be demonstrating with the grip on and the MKX 18 to 55mm T 2.9 lens. No, that's wrong. I'm demonstrating with the 50 to 135. I'm recording this video with the 18 to 55. Oh. Now, if you're wondering what T 2.9 means, let's start there. On the screen settings, page 2, set aperture unit for cinema lens to T number. Quality cinema lenses measure the aperture in T-stops, not f-stops. T means transmission. So while f-stops measure the size of the aperture, T measures the amount of light passed. While f4 on 2 lenses may provide a slightly different exposure, T-stops are identical from lens to lens. That's essential for cinematographers. The MKX lens is fully manual, with a focus ring, a zoom ring, and an aperture ring. Each has teeth to engage with the controls on a rig, which would have a large wheel to change the focus settings. The teeth also makes the rings easier to grip. Now, there's a control rod on the zoom lever. Its travel is 1/4 turn, perfectly positioned on the left side. Turn the aperture ring until the setting is T4. Now, in most situations, I use manual focus selected with the switch on the front. Now, on page 3, turn Focus Check Movie on. Then as soon as you turn the focus ring, the expanded view appears. Use the back dial to change the magnification and the focus joystick to position. Then the focus ring to focus. To reset to the full image, press the rear dial. Now, if you do this when the lens is fully zoomed, the MKX lens will retain its focus on this subject while you zoom. That's called parfocal. You can zoom in and out and never lose focus. With other lenses on the X-H1, you'd be able to use the touchscreen for a rack focus. With the MKX lens, you do that manually. And that's the other advantage of a cinema lens. While most lenses have no markings and turn forever, cinema lenses have a predefined focus travel that stops at infinity and at the closest distance, with distance marked on the lens. Cinematographers, well, actually their assistants, the focus pullers, use masking tape and mark the exact positions needed for each subject or position, and then move the focus ring as required. The X-H1 does have focus peaking. Press the back dial until it appears. And use the menu to set the color and the sensitivity that you prefer. Now, as long as we are being fussy cinematographers, let's switch to 4K 17:9. And this is the aspect ratio used for movie production. And 24 frames per second, the same frame rate used in motion picture film cameras. And just to show you that Fuji hasn't missed any detail here, now you can set the shutter speed to the exact 180-degree aperture used in motion picture cameras, 1/48. We've already talked about the histogram, but cinematographers like to refer to zebra for exposure. The X-H1 does not have zebra, but in the display custom settings, there is a highlight alert. This will flash any overexposed area. One of my exposure hacks is to use button dial settings to change the ISO dial from auto to command. Now, when the ISO dial is at A, the front dial is used to set the ISO. But for video, if you need to make adjustments while recording, the dial makes a clicking sound. The very last movie menu option is silent control, and once this is on, a Set button appears bottom right. Press it and use the screen functions to adjust whichever setting you need, silently. This also disables all the manual controls, so you won't accidentally turn a dial and change the shutter speed. Now, as long as we're being fussy, let's set a custom white balance, which is super simple to do. Select one of the three positions, press right, and aim at a gray or white card, press the shutter, and then OK. Now, I fine-tuned the classic Chrome simulation to a slightly more neutral setting using the Q menu, making adjustments to the highlight -2, shadow -2, and color -2, as well as the sharpness -3. Again, this is personal preference. I find this is a good neutral starting point for color adjustments while editing. Among the other film simulation settings, you'll see the Eterna Cinema setting, and that may be your preference. Fuji suggests that you increase the dynamic range to 400 to achieve the optimum results with Eterna, and that requires an ISO of 800, and delivers an extended dynamic range, which I demonstrated in my review of the X-H1. You'll find 12 stops or more if you shoot on a sunny day with your talent in the shade, and with standard settings I can either choose to expose properly for Kim or for the background. Switch to Eterna with 400% DR and the scene starts to become manageable. For extended dynamic range there's also F-Log, which provides 12 stops by compressing the standard 8 stops into the middle 50% of the recording, adding 2 above and 2 below. You'll need to grade this footage in post, and remember that for now, most displays can only handle 6 to 8 stops, so if your original scene has only 8 stops and you've compressed the range using F-Log, by the time you grade it back to 8, you're trying to create a dynamic range that no longer exists in the recording. Fuji provides free downloadable LUTs on their website, and they're a good starting point for color grading. If you intend to use these settings, make sure you've sampled and experimented before you start a project, just so you have the exposure in the recording and grading in post figured out. If you're vlogging, use the remote app, but beware that it's only capable of shooting at the reduced 720 HD setting. Now, there is little danger of the X-H1 overheating in normal shooting conditions and temperatures, but it may happen. I haven't seen it yet. Each battery lasts for about an hour of continuous recording, and there is one battery grip peculiarity. When a battery is exhausted, the X-H1 stops recording, even if the remaining batteries are still fully charged. Now, this could happen at any time. You can see that the battery is red, but short of stopping and switching batteries, there's nothing you can do but be vigilant until it stops and then restart. Plugging in the grip's power cable will power the camera, eliminating that problem. The camera can't be powered from USB. Well, that's it. I hope your shoot goes well. If you have comments or questions, please leave them below. I do read and reply to all relevant and civil comments. Thanks very much for watching. Shoot until your battery grip is exhausted and your SD cards are full. And if you find this channel resourceful, please subscribe.